Hi all, Anthony Wilson, the Public Information Officer for the City of San Angelo, here today with a very special episode of Ask Me Anything. We're not really going to be taking questions about anything, we're going to be taking questions about food trucks in particular. And here joining me to discuss the food trucks issues, which of course has been in the news the last couple of days, is our City Attorney, Teresa James. Teresa, thank you for being with us.
You're welcome.
So, as we all know, the last couple of days there's been a lot of media revolving around Lone Star Cheeseburger, which is just across the parking lot from where we're sitting.
That's right.
And what the city is requiring Lone Star Cheeseburger to do is demonstrate their mobility. We're going to get to that in a second. First of all, I think it's kind of important for our audience to know that you and I actually love eating at Lone Star Cheeseburger.
I do, yeah. It's one of my favorite places, actually.
So what do you like to have there?
When I go there, I always get the buffalo chicken sandwich.
Really?
I do.
Which is not a cheeseburger. And you know what?
I know.
I don't get the cheeseburger either. I get the salmon slider.
Right.
Because I like to eat just like a little bit healthy. Like, you know, I don't want to turn into Jughead or Wimpy by eating too many hamburgers. So I feel good about myself whenever I eat the salmon slider at a fast food, food truck.
Right. Same with the chicken.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's healthy, yes.
So we're hoping this all works out so that we can continue eating at Lone Star Cheeseburger.
I do. I hope it works out for a lot of reasons, that one included.
Yeah. So let's talk about this. Why must Lone Star Cheeseburger, along with every other mobile food vendor in San Angelo, at some point during the course of a year, demonstrate their mobility?
Well, in 2015, the regulations that tell us how we're supposed to regulate this industry changed to tell, and it told us we have to have them show us that they are mobile at least once a year. There's no discretion in that for us. It's a regulation that the state has created. We have to do it. And
so it's required by state law. And so the state law requires the city to be the authority that enforces that law?
Well, what state law says is the designated authority has to show that. We have designated the health department to be the designated authority for all of those codes.
And so do fixed restaurants, fixed location restaurants, such as let's say the Angry Cactus, do they have to meet a higher regulatory standard when it comes to health and safety measures?
Absolutely, and it's not just restaurants. All fixed businesses have higher standards than anything that is temporary or that moves as a business.
And so talk about why that is.
Well, the purpose of all of our regulations is to promote the health, safety, and welfare of our citizens. And so whenever we are looking at regulations for a particular business, what we're looking at is what's the impact to the health, safety, and welfare. Now, I know that there's been a lot of questions and a lot of statements made that say, well, whether or not this truck moves or not doesn't make his food any safer. It doesn't make it more likely or less likely to make me sick. And that's a true statement. I don't think anybody's expressing concern about whether or not the food at that truck is good food or if it's going to make you sick. But when we as the city are talking about health, safety, and welfare, we're talking about much broader issues than that. We're talking about traffic safety, pedestrian safety, fire safety. We're talking about ADA accessibility. We talk about aesthetics. We talk about the number of parking places. All kinds of things go into our assessment.
And so in particular, I have a list here of some of the things that a fixed location must adhere to that a mobile location does not, and that's including building codes such as our electrical, plumbing, and mechanical. Also, things related to the provision of hot water, whether or not there are sewer connections and water connections. And when you talk about building codes, this location in particular actually burned down in 2015. So that sort of underscores the need for some standards that protect the public safety.
Exactly, and the difference between a business that moves and one that doesn't. For instance, if I have a food truck and I go across the street from your business, for the time that I'm across the street from your business, there's going to be increased traffic. There's probably going to be increased pedestrians. There's going to be parking concerns. There might be noise concerns, or I might have a big ugly sign that you don't like. But you only have to deal with that for a very short period of time. Versus if I built a restaurant across the street from you, I would have your traffic concerns would be ongoing. Your pedestrian concerns would be ongoing. If there's a person with a disability that can't access a food truck, well, the food truck will move, and the next time they can access it. If they can't access my permanent restaurant, they never can access it. So the standards are just different because of the mobility and the degree of impact that has.
So in other words, a restaurateur has to make a decision whether or not they're going to operate as a fixed location and meet those higher levels and standards,
Correct.
or whether they're going to operate as a mobile food vendor. And if they choose that with that lower set of standards, one of the things that they have to do is prove their mobility, to prove that they are in essence not a fixed operation.
Exactly. We're not asking him to prove mobility to determine whether or not his food is safe. We are asking him to prove mobility so we can determine which set of standards he needs to adhere to. And that's been explained. It is a business decision. You don't have to meet as many standards to be a food truck. It's less expensive to do that. But the other point that's made, if you're a food truck and you move all the time, your customers can't always find you. So it's a balancing act that the business owner has to make. It's not one that the city makes for them.
And this is one that actually Mr. Condon likely understands, since he owns a mobile food truck. He also owns and operates a fixed location restaurant. So he understands the differences between, the distinctions between one versus the other.
Well, I would think that he would. I guess he would be able to tell you best what he knows about those two things, but I would think that he would understand that.
So let's start from the beginning of this particular case. When was Lone Star Cheeseburger first notified that it needed to demonstrate mobility?
Well, in December of 2015, those new regulations went into effect in October. And so
we're talking about the state regulations.
The state regulations. In December of 2015, we sent a letter to all the food vendors, the mobile vendors, and told them, because of this change in regulations, when we're going to ask you to renew your permit, you're going to have to come to us at City Hall, and we will do that there to comply with this provision. So that was the very first time that he, as well as everybody else, was told.
So, and what does state law say about how that mobility or that demonstration of mobility must be demonstrated?
Well, I actually copied the provision, and what it specifically says is the regulatory authority, which, as I said, is our health department, shall require a mobile food unit operator to demonstrate that the vehicle is readily movable. That's the part that, Mr. Condon is focusing on, readily movable. What does that mean? Well, it goes on to say what that can mean, and it says, a regulatory authority may require a mobile food unit to come on an annual basis or as often as required to a location designated by the regulatory authority as proof that the mobile food unit is readily movable. So it says you have to have them demonstrate this. You can make them actually move to demonstrate that.
And so your thinking is that simply because a structure has wheels and it has an axle, as the food trailer does, that doesn't necessarily mean that it is readily movable.
No, I don't believe that that's all. I think that is indicators that it's movable, but junked vehicles also have wheels and axles, and they, by definition and by the regulatory authority we have, aren't moving. What I do believe in is objective criteria for enforcement whenever we can. If I had one of our health inspectors go out to the food truck and say, well, it has wheels, it has an axle, it looks like, that trailer's big enough to carry what's on it, there's some subjectivity in there. If I say everybody has to drive to City Hall to show you're movable, that's the same standard. It's an objective standard. Did they drive to City Hall or not? It's a yes or no question. And that is always my preference in enforcement.
And in fact, I have a copy of that letter that you mentioned from December 2015 here. And it does say that everyone has to come to City Hall, that's the standard that everyone's going to be held to. And so there have been people who have asked, well, why not just let them move it a few feet or drive it across the parking lot? And I guess it gets back to that consistent, objective enforcement of the law that you just spoke to.
It does, and I think the other difference in just moving it across this parking lot is that what we're trying to show, in part, is that these are street-ready vehicles. There's a different standard for what a street-ready vehicle is when you're driving across the parking lot, in addition to actually getting on a street.
And so the state law then does not say that it has to move a certain distance or go to a certain place. It just says that it has to demonstrate that it is readily movable.
That's correct.
At the discretion of the regulatory authority.
That's correct.
So do other cities require mobile food units to demonstrate their mobility by driving it to a specific location such as City Hall?
Yes, I mean, pretty much all of them that I'm familiar with do. In the last couple of days, we called around to ask a couple of them, and the ones that we were able to get in touch with were Plano, Fort Worth, San Antonio, and Austin, who all require the food vendors at least once a year to come to them. The only city that we talked to that does not require that is Dallas. The reason Dallas does not require the food vendors to come to them is there's no parking around their city hall. I don't know if you've ever been there, but there's not a lot of parking. And so they have a different process in place. And what their process requires is they say, we will come to you, but in order to be inspected, you have to give us your route and your itinerary so we can go find you where you say you're going to be to verify that you are, in fact, mobile. So even though they don't require them to come to them, there's other steps they take to ensure that mobility.
Well, and at least in my mind, I think driving to City Hall, if Austin does that, and Austin has this booming, thriving food truck community, and everybody knows that it exists, and everyone loves it, and in fact, they seem to be sort of the model that everyone would like to be when it comes to food trucks. If that's what's done in Austin, it seems to be working there. I would think that would be a pretty good model to follow.
Well, you know, it seems to be working here. We had 7, I believe, trucks permitted in the month of June, and all 7 of those showed that they were mobile. So I think, you know, Austin, yes, does it, and they are very successful, and they are used as a model. The food truck folks talk about Austin when they talk to us. So that is a very good, you know, process to use because it is demonstrated to be effective.
Now, since 2015, has Lone Star Cheeseburger, since that time, ever been notified that it must comply with this state law?
They have. They received that letter in 2015 along with everybody else. And then in 2016, they hadn't complied, so we sent them another letter. In the meantime, there have been phone calls, there have been meetings, there have been numerous conversations with city administration, the city attorney's office, the health department, lots of people involved in conversations with Lone Star. There was another meeting at the end of last year in which we said, you still haven't moved, and so you need to tell us when that's going to happen by, or we're going to start enforcement. And we were told that there was going to be a wedding or a big event that was going to happen in either May or June, and we said, whenever you're not there, call us, we'll drive by, see if you're there. If you're not, we'll check the box and you're done. Well, that call never came. And so it was time for us to start formal enforcement.
And so people have been asking, why are we just now enforcing this? Why are we making an issue of it now? And so I think the truest answer is we've been trying to gain cooperation with this particular vendor for a long time now to avoid what we're now going through, and a lot of promises have been made and none of those have materialized.
That's correct. And you know, I think because this was a new regulation, with all new regulations, we truly are, I know the perception out there is not this, but we truly are trying to be very friendly and helpful to our business community. So when a new regulation goes into place, there's always a period of time where we're a little lax in the enforcement to give people the understanding and give them the opportunity to learn what the new rules are. That happened with everybody else. And at some point, you just have to say you've had enough time, it's time to enforce, or it's not fair to everybody else.
So we've sort of moved from a position of trying to gain compliance to now having to enact enforcement.
That is correct.
So what happens if this vendor does not comply with the law?
Well, if he ultimately doesn't comply, you know, he has a right to an appeal, and if he has an appeal, there'll be an appeal hearing, and then, or he can demonstrate mobility. If he doesn't do that, we will revoke his permit, and that will be indicated by posting something on the truck itself. If he continues to operate after revoking the permit, the statutes and our code of ordinances allows us the power of injunction to go to a district court and ask to have an order issued telling them not to operate.
So eventually the permit could be pulled, and this could end up with the court determining what the fate of Lone Star Cheeseburger is.
Yes.
Of San Angelo's 38 permitted food trucks, how many have demonstrated mobility?
37.
37. So what does that say in your mind about the reasonableness of this standard?
Well, I think it shows that it's definitely reasonable, but it also shows it's understandable. You know, 37 folks have decided that they know that going to City Hall demonstrates mobility, so it's not a complicated idea at all.
And you know what's interesting is I think the health department supplied me this document, but it's a document that shows it goes to all of our mobile food establishments, and it's a checklist for their inspection, and it has 26 items here that are enumerated here, and they're all very understandable, like you said. And number 23 is mobile unit readily movable. And so, I mean, it seems to me that everyone sort of knows what the rules are.
Right.
It's provided to them, and in fact, there's a checklist so you can go down the list to determine whether or not you're in compliance with the rule.
And one reason we give them checklists like that is we don't want anybody to come into the office and leave not knowing what to expect. We want there to be few, if any, surprises in these processes. So when we give them the checklist, they can go back, figure out if they've done everything, and then come to us. So we're not constantly having to go back and forth as to whether or not they've met all their permit requirements.
Now, this argument has been made, or this claim on the internet. Does the city stand to gain monetarily at all from the enforcement of this law?
No, but the community does.
In what sort of way?
As we go back to that health, safety, and welfare, we have to ensure compliance with these rules that are in place to protect our citizens. If people are just, disregarding them, that does not lead to that kind of control of those issues and those concerns that can be dangerous for our public.
And I really want to underscore this. You've said that an objective and consistent enforcement of the law is vital, and explain why that is.
At the core, a city exists for the benefit of the citizens who live there. And so to me, there's just a basic fairness in making sure that all enforcement is done consistently. I shouldn't give you a benefit that I'm not giving to somebody else. But on top of that, that idea of fundamental fairness has been incorporated into the Constitution of the United States in the 14th Amendment that says that no state shall deny to any citizen within its jurisdiction the equal protection of law. So to require enforcement in a consistent manner ensures that fairness is there. It ensures that that right to have equal protection has been protected. The best way to be consistent is to be objective, to not allow a lot of subjective criteria to enter into a process. So when we're talking about this issue of mobility, again, the wheels, the axle, that all demonstrates the possibility of mobility. But to know somebody is actually mobile, the best way to do that is to actually have them move.
All right. Some have questioned whether the city has designs on the spot that Lone Star Cheeseburger occupies because it's adjacent to the City Hall Annex where we're now sitting. Is there any truth to that whatsoever?
No.
And in fact, one of our colleagues yesterday noted that we've been trying to gain compliance with this for about 3 years now, and the city has only occupied this property for a year.
That's
so,
correct.
so that seems to be a specious argument at best. So will you remind folks about how the dialogue between food truck operators and City Hall began last year and what was the result of that?
Yeah, actually it was Carl White, who was the director of our Parks and Recreation Department. He thought of the idea because he noticed there were more and more food trucks and people really seemed to like them. So he put on the Parks Board agenda an item asking for their opinion and direction on whether or not we should open a food truck venue within one of our parks. And what happened at that meeting is that a lot of food truck folks came to that meeting. What they told us was, thank you for the offer, but we know how to do this. We want to do this. Help us do this. And so after that conversation, we were like, if you want to do it, we will help you do it. So we had a food truck forum. Now the food truck forum was very well attended, and it was a time where the city staff mostly listened. And we heard a few things at that forum. The first thing we heard was that the itinerant vendor permit that we were requiring folks to get, where they had to go to the police department and have background checks, that was burdensome. We felt it was unnecessary, and we agreed it was probably burdensome for the benefit we were getting. So we took action after that meeting to change that. We changed the ordinance. The other thing we heard was that the process was, it was confusing, and there was a lot of back and forth, and it wasn't very efficient. That was a conversation we were already having internally. How can we make this process better? Because we were feeling those same things. So after that meeting, we looked at our process and we streamlined it. There's now one point of contact for people. They have the application to fill out. We route those applications electronically, so everybody's reviewing it at the same time. It's not I review it, then you review it, so it shortens the time frame. We're looking at doing electronic signatures, so they don't even have to come back up here to get their permit. We all sign it electronically and they get an electronic copy. And we consolidated the inspections. So when they come up here with their truck, they're going to meet with the fire marshal and they're going to meet with the health department. And if there's planning issues, they can meet with them as well. So it's one trip with all the inspections at one time to save everybody, a little bit of time and effort.
So so the trip to City Hall is meant to be for the food vendors' convenience.
It is for their convenience. And the other thing that came out of that, there's still things in the works that came out of that forum. We're updating actually the Parks and Lakes ordinance, but as part of that revision, we're going to recommend to council that they allow anybody with one of these permits to operate at the lake or in our parks. The planning department's also looking at the zoning ordinances. There's a lot of places food trucks are prohibited that we think they should be allowed. So we're going to change some provisions to allow them to operate more easily at different parts of the city. And we are looking at those standards to create that food truck park so that somebody who's interested in doing that will know what's going to be required to do that. For the parks ordinance, that's just pretty much saying they can do this. There's not going to be a lot of regulation around with that. So we're probably not going to have any kind of public input into that particular ordinance other than what's going to be provided at council. But I know the Planning and Development Department is planning on having some community forums to discuss those other 2 zoning changes, but they're just not to that point yet.
So we have some questions from Facebook.
Okay.
And so one of those, someone is saying that they used to live in Austin and they have all these food trucks and food truck parks and they never move. I think, though, there's a distinct possibility that those food trucks once a year leave that park, drive down to City Hall, demonstrate their mobility, and then return exactly back to where they were before.
Right. One of the things we're looking at are parks kind of like they have in Austin, and they have them other places too, where there's one commissary for multiple trucks, and they do get to stay there more permanently. But our health department contacted Austin again yesterday to verify, and the guy was adamant that every single truck in Austin comes to us and they get a new permit every single year to demonstrate that mobility.
Now, someone that I've engaged in quite a bit of dialogue with online over the last couple of days has said, show me in the ordinance where it says that, you know, they must demonstrate mobility by driving down to City Hall. And of course, we talked about the letter that was sent to everybody that says, here's how we're going to require you to demonstrate mobility. So does the fact that it's not codified in city ordinance that way make it any less legally pertinent that, you know, we have a policy? Does that still carry the weight of being legally binding?
It's still legally binding to require them to move wherever we tell them to move. It's actually more restrictive if we put it in an ordinance saying you have to come to City Hall, then they have to come to City Hall. Right now, we say you have to come to City Hall, but there are certain exceptions we grant. For instance, if somebody says, I'm going to be at this location and we're going to be close, we just inspect it there. All we need to see is that you're at a different place than you were before. So we don't want to be tied to an ordinance. The provisions and the regulations are lenient in that they say you have the authority to tell them where to move. We believe we've done that multiple times in writing and in person to lots of these vendors in a way that's very clear because they do come or they do meet us where we're supposed to meet us. So I think it's still completely enforceable. It's actually more restrictive if we put that in an ordinance.
And so, to point out too, the location where we're sitting, and again, Lone Star Cheeseburgers just across the parking lot, it's about 3 blocks to City Hall, so it's not as if it's driving halfway across the community at all. Right,
and you know, I know that I've seen concerns expressed about the amount of revenue he might lose if we make him move. I talked to the health folks this morning, and they're willing to meet him on a Sunday when he's typically closed, you know, after hours, whenever is convenient for him to move. All we need to do is show that mobility.
Okay, let's see here. We have other questions. Of course, a lot of people are endorsing a food truck, a park, and our parks director chimed in and said, I really like that idea. We could do it at the Paseo, so there's an idea. And then someone says, in Odessa, if they have a similar setup, they are considered a permanent building. And again, that gets back to the heart of this matter, is whether or not this is actually a fixed location, which has a whole different set of standards, or whether it's a mobile vendor. And if it's a mobile vendor, then part of that is showing that you are in fact mobile.
Absolutely.
So, Teresa, I think that's all the questions that I have. Is there anything that I haven't covered that you might want to say about this situation? No,
except I think that, you know, as city staff, we're always looking for new and innovative things for the city of San Angelo. And so this food truck idea, you know, when Carl brought it forward, I don't think there was anybody, I mean, he can answer better than me, but nobody that I heard said this is a terrible idea. You know, what we did say is our ordinances are not set up for this. We're going to have to do some work to see how other cities are doing this to make it most effective. But everybody that I have talked to and that's going to be working on this is excited about the ideas of having some standards so food trucks can operate more consistently and more freely within our city.
And of course, if you have more questions about this, you are welcome to post them on our Facebook page. We will try to answer all the questions and comments and concerns that you have. Teresa, what's the timeline now? What happens next?
Well, you know, he was sent a certified letter. And it takes a while for us to figure out when that was actually delivered to him. That starts a timeline, a 10-day timeline, for him either to ask for that appeal or to demonstrate mobility to us. If that doesn't happen, then as I said, we will, you know, revoke his permit. And if he continues to operate, then we will seek an injunction.
And of course, the best of all worlds is that, you know, he shows his mobility.
Right.
He gets in compliance with the law.
Absolutely.
And then we all continue enjoying Lone Star cheeseburgers.
Right, and if we can find a time that's convenient for him, I know they're willing to work with him on that as well.
And the fact that we've tried to do that over the past 3 years, I think, is evidence of that.
Yes.
So anyway, again, if you have questions or comments, you're welcome to post them on our Facebook page. We'll do our dead level best to answer them. And don't just like our page, follow our page, because we're going to be doing this on a regular basis about a wide range of issues, particularly these that are of interest, impact, and importance to the community. And this certainly is. I think this has touched the nerve, and hopefully, you know, we've been able to explain what the city's position is on this. And it really just boils down to enforcing the law, which we're charged to do.